Hi, and welcome back. So, good news and bad news about yesterday's blizzard. Here at Issues That Matter, our favorite host, Robert Picone, doesn't have power because of the storm, so he is not in front of the camera today. He's behind the camera causing trouble, don't you know? Again, because of the storm, we have a little larger than normal window of opportunity, and it's difficult to get Celia, so we are keeping her for 2 back-to-back sessions today. We did part 1 just a few minutes ago where we talked about the 2 different kinds of trauma, that there's event trauma and developmental trauma. We talked about ACEs, all things trauma related, and now we're going to go into treatment. But first, let me give you a little bit of background of who she is. So Celia Grant is a board-certified, forgive me for reading this, board-certified clinical social worker with over 30 years experience, although she doesn't look it. Celia is trained in a multitude of psychotherapy methods. She's a facilitator for EMDR, Institute, past trainer for sensory motor psychotherapy, and currently the assistant and clinical advisor for Deirdre Faye's Safely Embodied. Celia is also a certified, I'm going to say it wrong, a psychosynthesis, thank you, a psychospiritual psychotherapy method, and is trained in internal family systems. She's known in the Portland, Maine community as well as nationally and internationally as a trauma expert, which is why we have her here. And if you haven't seen part 1, watch part 1, amazing. So moving into part 2. Yay, you're still here. Yes. Yay, lock the doors. We've got her for another session. Yay.
Yay.
So where we left off last time, we were talking about the different kinds of healing, right?
Well, we started off talking about the 3 phases of healing trauma.
3 phases of healing. Thank you.
So when somebody comes into a clinical office, into a therapist's office, the therapist needs to be assessing their stabilization. So what we're assessing is internal and external resources. So do they have a network of people, a support network to love and care for them? Do they have financial resources? Do they have like a job or insurance or whatever? Like those are external resources. Internal resources, and especially for trauma survivors, this is where most trauma survivors will cut short. They don't know how to self-soothe. They don't have resiliency. That's the ability to be able to move through life on life's terms and be able to get yourself moving and going. And so it's soothing, grounding.
Can I ask about soothing? Because it seems, and you know, maybe it's because I'm a non-drinker, is it my imagination or do women really go for the wine?
Well, most people, not just women, but also men, women might show up in a clinical office more so than men, but not always. They will use substances or have an eating disorder or a sex addiction or gambling or shopping.
And that's their way of soothing.
Right, so they try to get it from the outside. Right, so that would be like an external resource. I got to get something in me to make me feel calm.
Right.
But what we really need is internal resources, the ability to ground ourselves, the ability to be centered and present in the present moment. Those are the internal resources that help trauma resolve faster. So then the second phase is reprocessing the trauma, the who, what, where, how, when, what happened to you, and how is it stored in your system. And on the break, we were talking about the 3 levels of information processing. So the body is the simplest level to process information. You feel something or you don't.
Right.
And we call that somatic work. Right? And usually in the body, we work with the sensation and shifting the felt experience. The second layer, which is in the midbrain.
Okay, say that again.
Yeah.
So the somatic
is work, and when I get into the sensory motor psychotherapy, we'll
talk
about that. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But the body, like if I say to you, you know, when you think about your trauma and you drop it into your body, where do you feel it in your body and what's the sensation? So say you have ruminating thoughts of I'm not worthy. Okay, and I say, drop that into your body, and where do you feel it? I feel it in my belly. Well, what do you feel? A clench, a push, a pull, a grasp. And then that's the sensation. That body sensation is going up through the central nervous system, right? What we talked about in terms of affect tolerance in the body. And it's telling the brain, you're not worthy. But if we shift the sensation, we call that bottom-up processing.
Bottom-up processing.
So if we shift the sensation, then the emotion should settle, and then there's the potential for new thoughts to come in. Remember that window of tolerance, right? Where now someone's in the window. So the body, you either feel something or you don't, right? So that's the easiest way that we process information as a being. The second layer, which is in the midbrain, is the emotional response. All emotions are physiological. You don't cry with that like crinkling in your face and the tears welling up. You don't have anxiety without that. Whoops, sorry. That probably didn't sound good to people.
Sorry, guys.
I didn't realize the mic was there. But that pitter patter in your chest. Or you don't feel shame without that sinking feeling in your belly, right?
So the emotion and the thought.
No,
and
emotion and sensation.
And the physical
sensation
go hand in hand.
is emotional processing.
Okay.
Right? And then the third is when the prefrontal cortex. So remember we talked about the prefrontal cortex, you know, in utero to 3 and how we get our imprints, right? Well, if you got a bad zebra print or an imprint that repeatedly through early childhood, school, that I'm not worthy, now when you get that body sensation and those feelings, automatically you got those ruminations. And changing from the cognitive level is much harder because you got to be in the window. So most, and I'm going to say a very broad statement, but I don't believe cognitive behavioral therapy works because you can't change a thought. If you change, their theory is you change the thought, you change the feeling, you change the body. And we know people talking about their story is re-traumatizing. And if you just say...
That's big. I can't tell you how many people I know in the world of trauma that said that just going to a therapist, I'm thinking of somebody I know that's a correctional officer. And he's like, you know, going and talking to a therapist and just telling the story over and over and over and over and over again, all that's doing is hurting me.
Well, that's why a lot of Vietnam vets, like the primary treatment in the VA and I think it might even still be in some VAs,
talk therapy.
And they put them in the group and they say, tell us about your combat experience. Well, one guy talks and the rest are all triggered, right? Because when you hear it, you're thinking the brain has a way of going like, oh, it's an associative, right, in nature, adaptive and associative in nature. The brain's going like, oh, that happened to me. And the next thing you know, you've got an emotional response and you've got a body response. So when we do bottom-up processing, which I'll talk a little bit more, if we change the sensation, then we open that window. Remember that window when I said was? So the second phase is reprocessing trauma, and I'm going to talk about some trauma methods that are highly effective.
I'm really looking forward to that. But you're saying that you go to the feeling first.
No, you go to the body.
Yeah, excuse me, I meant body, feeling, what you
the
feel
sensation.
in the sensation. So you go to the sensation, and then from the sensation to the mind.
Right, So if we can stabilize the sensation, the triggered states, and then so that would be stabilization. Then when we reprocess the trauma, we go, wow, what's this sensation connected to? Okay, so I'm going to go into treatment. So one of the ones that you introduced me as an EMDR person. I'm a facilitator. I'm an approved consultant. I've been trained since 1996 in EMDR. So I've done thousands of EMDR sessions, but it's not the only thing that I'm known for at this juncture. But EMDR was where I started getting to really understand trauma, because neuroscience was also in tandem while Francine Shapiro was honing what EMDR is. And so EMDR, what we do, if the easiest way to explain it is, we are bringing up a triggered state in a mindful way. We call it dual attention. You're going to be able to be in yourself, and then you're going to bring up the components of trauma. So, what are the components of trauma? Well, we have to go, I'm going to step back to experience. How do we experience as human beings? We experience through our thoughts, our memories, our beliefs, our feelings, sad, mad, glad, our inner body sensation, tight, grip, grasp, our senses, the voices we hear inside ourselves, the thoughts, the pictures that come up in our mind, right? And then our gestures and our movements. So we experience as a being from those 5 fields. So when we talk about EMDR, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, from the first session, we talked about what happens in the brain in trauma, what happens in the amygdala, the hypothalamus, the HPA axis. And so what we're saying is we're going to bring all that up. What happened to you? What's the picture? What's the belief that you have about yourself? What are the emotions and what are the sensations? That's a triggered state, but we're bringing it up in a mindful way. Why? Because Francine Shapiro in the 80s was a behaviorist doctoral student, and she was studying REM sleep. REM sleep is a natural state when we're in our deep sleep that we consolidate memory. So our brains, and everybody listening on the tape, are not only listening to me, they're watching you. They're probably hearing things outside in their living room, or whatever, or wherever they're listening, or whatever's happening around. But you're not conscious of it. But the brain is taking it all in. And when we go in our deep sleep, we reprocess, and then it consolidates the memory, and then it goes underground until something, a stimulus outside yourself, calls it back up. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So we're saying, EMDR, we're going to bring you to that triggered state, but you're going to be conscious. And you're going to reprocess it because it's been consolidated, what we call dysfunctionally stored. And so the therapist, right?
I like that. That's a new T-shirt.
Right. My brain is dysfunctionally storing
stored.
memory.
Okay.
Right. So the EMDR therapist sets it up, and then the goal is to get out of the way, because the brain is adaptive and associative. We've adapted, but now we have associations. If I asked you what you ate for lunch March 9th, 2017, you wouldn't remember.
Unless it was awful.
Unless it was awful, or unless you had a fabulous lunch with someone you cared about and you went, oh, I went to this place, and oh, whenever I go to that place, I eat this.
Yeah.
So, oh, I had a chicken sandwich at so-and-so's,
Yeah.
right? Because there's an association.
Right.
Well, if the brain has dysfunctionally stored information, we're calling it all up, and we're saying, now associate, and then if you have what we call dual attention, you're able to observe and experience at the same time, then the brain goes into what I talked about, Bruce Ecker, it goes into that state of like, whoa, wait a minute, that happened then, that's not happening now. Oh, it's over. So how it's dysfunctionally stored, the event might not feel like it's over. That's why you have a symptom. You don't go out of the house, you can't be close to people, you avoid situations. Right? But now you go, oh, the danger is over. The amygdala is now reset. Does that make sense?
It does. So I had debilitating PSTD for many, many years, and it took a long time to get out of it. And I told you before that I would stop my foot to remind myself that I'm right here, right now.
And that's a resource.
That
says, I'm in my present day, I'm not that person that when she got traumatized, I'm an adult. And so that became a resource for you. Yeah. And that becomes a habituated pattern, so that like if you get fearful, you can stomp your feet. Yeah. But it took learning to stomp your foot, and it took reprocessing the brain, reprocessing the events and the experiences, so that now you can stop your foot and your brain goes, oh, I'm not afraid anymore.
So the people who are suffering, and that's where my heart goes. My heart goes to the adult survivors who are still actively suffering because of an event that happened, and their brain is remembering it. They're having the sensation in their body.
Trigger.
The trigger. They're remembering what happened, and as if, and when I talk to them, it's as if it's happening yesterday. I mean, it's so fresh, it's so raw.
Right.
So when you're, go ahead.
Yeah, that's called a flashback or an emotional flashback. Yep. They're re-experiencing as if time and space had not changed, because we call that state-specific memory. And this gets a little bit into a little bit of a hairy place where it's not a little bit complicated to understand.
But is this what you do with them when you take them?
Yes.
When you go to their sensation, you're creating a safe place.
But not just in EMDR. Other places, when I talk about other treatments, we just narrow the field, right?
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk about that. But in EMDR, we bring it all up at once.
Yeah.
It's the belief system, it's the image, it's the feelings, it's the body sensation, and we bring it all up at once. And then the theory is, we call it the accelerated adaptive information processing, which is a made-up name for like a highway in the brain that goes, we're just going to let the train go by and you're just going to see the scenes. And if you can hold dual attention, if you can stay grounded in your body, the brain will recalibrate.
Love that.
That's the theory of EMDR.
Love that.
Now, what I was
if you can hold dual attention,
right,
where you're watching what happened to you, like train boxcars going by,
right,
and you remain a witness rather than jumping in the train,
instead of being in it,
you can just stay outside of it, watch it go by.
Correct.
Then your brain will recalculate, because I can hear the old version of me and my trauma brothers and sisters in the world saying, if I allow myself to go there, I am going to go insane, I'm going to die, I'm going to, right now I have control in my life, I'm able to function, but if I go somewhere and I let it out, I'll never bring it back in. I won't function.
Right, because another theoretical piece is at the moment of trauma, the self splits. There's the part of us that are holding all the components, the images, the thoughts, the feelings, the inner body sensation, the emotions. That's state-specific memory. But then we have to get on with daily life.
Right.
That's what we're wired for.
Right.
So if you were raped, you got to go take a shower and go to school or go to work. Right. You know, if you've been in a car accident, you can't sit home and be immobilized. You have to get up and get going. And so that's another layer of dissociation that we talked about in the first tape. But we're wired to go on with daily life. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Total sense, yeah.
So with EMDR, what we're saying is like, you're going to hold this and we're going to bring up those components so that your brain, because a triggered state says, I don't know I've gone on with daily life.
Right.
I feel like I'm still here.
Yeah.
I'm not, like I'm in my trauma.
Yeah.
And that's what is debilitating for most people. That's what interrupts life.
Right.
And and a lot of times with PTSD, it can be years before you stop functioning in daily life.
Don't I know? So why it's such a gift to have you is because you have done thousands of people who have been
traumatized,
totally traumatized, to a point of debilitation, and they've healed and been able to rejoin the world, be in their own body, and restore themselves.
But I don't want to give the illusion that you can just come into treatment and you or even do a series of treatment.
Right.
Because what we talked about was that life is a mystery and we can't predict.
Right.
And life is uncertain.
Yeah.
And so things can happen and it can re-trigger your trauma. It doesn't mean it didn't work.
Right.
It just means that you're meeting life in a new experience.
And so that happened to me. I was moving along, something happened, and I felt like I went through a period of time with no anxiety, no panic attacks, and I was feeling like the bomb. And then something happened, and I was having regular attacks that were just awful. And I thought, well, you know, I'm a failure. You know,
Right.
I'm broken. I'm never going to be okay again, or whatever. And then I was okay again. And then I had a period of time of being okay again. And then something else happened. And what happened over time was the duration of the attacks got fewer and fewer, and the duration of not having attacks got longer and longer.
Right.
And it was a process.
Right, and I call those psychotlets.
What?
And it's like, so like you did all your work
Yeah.
and all of a sudden you're in a new experience and you're like, what the heck?
Yeah.
Why am I experiencing this? Like as if I never did any work.
Yeah.
And I have come, so a psychotlet is what I call a temporary state of insanity,
Okay.
which is a triggered state.
Yeah.
But I have come to see them as portals of
Yeah.
healing.
Yeah.
And that we go from like, treatment
I
helps
like
you go
that.
from
portals of healing.
right. So we go from surviving to thriving.
Yeah.
In every new experience, we're going to thrive. So if we have a new experience that's been traumatic to us and we're not thriving, we might have a psychotlet.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you haven't done your work.
Yeah.
It just means there's a portal here because you're trying to, when I go into the third phase, reintegrate.
Yeah.
Right? And reintegrate and be in life in the way, like inviting joy into your life or inviting relationship into your life. It's a new experience. So you're going to have these little psychotlets because,
Right.
because it's a new experience and you're trying something new. And for a trauma survivor, uncertainty is so hard.
And it doesn't mean, because I can totally get where somebody would have a psychotlet
Yes.
and be like, doesn't work.
Right.
That's it. I'm screwed up. I'm going to be screwed up for the rest of my life. So be it. I'm just wasting my time and money in therapy. I'm not going to go anymore.
Right. Right.
Right.
And instead of seeing it as a portal for a new layer of
new
healing.
layer of healing.
Right. So I want to go into some of the other treatments
please.
because so sensory motors, when we talked about narrowing the field into just sensation and doing the bottom-up processing, and why you would work in a sensory motor way where EMDR brings it all up at once, sensory motor goes a little bit around those components of experience. How the client can tolerate the sensation, then we can add the emotion states, and then we can bring up the thought, the cognition. And so it's a slower process, but because the body can process information faster, you stabilize the system in the bottom up. Then you work with the emotional state, and then you work with adding in the cognition, the belief system. Mm-hmm. And in sensory motor, one level is just to work with the sensation, the traumatic activation. Most trauma survivors, if they're traumatically activated, they'll have shaking and crying and, high emotional states. You're not going to be able to sit there and talk to them.
Right.
You have to help that move through the body. The body is just like the emotions, is an arc. There's a beginning, a middle, and an end. Mm-hmm. And you want to move that sensation through the system until it comes to a place of completion. So going back to the fight-flight response, if you're always in fight, if your knee-jerk reaction to stress is to fight, well, you have to learn how to hold that impulse of fighting and let it move through your body instead of like hitting, right? Or if you didn't fight, you need to learn that what it feels like to just push the opponent or the stressor away. And if you feel it, sensory motor is just that felt level to feel the empowerment. So you work with the traumatic activation to empower the system. And if you do it, if the clinician guides the client, then all the other layers of process information, the feelings will change, the thoughts will change.
So this is a beautiful thing. And what's coming to mind for me is some human beings will come up against that edge and they will medicate it. It's too scary.
Right.
Right? And they shut down.
I want to shut it down.
I want to shut it down. And so I'm going to drink, I'm going to drug, I'm going to cut, I'm going to have sex, I'm going to steal something, I'm going to do whatever, I'm going to get on the treadmill for 3 hours, I'm going to do something to shut it down.
That's right.
And what comes to mind for me around that is when I'm eating my meal plan for competition. that hunger would come up, and in the moment, it feels like I'm starving.
Right.
Like I'm going to die. Now, I've had, however many 100,000 calories already. I'm not really, but it feels like that in the moment. It feels real. It feels like I'm starving. Hand over the chocolate and no one's going to get hurt. But if I just be with it, if I just sit with it and allow myself to feel it, that feeling passes.
It does, but
is that what you're saying?
Yes,
so
but it's also the working with the sensation of it. But see, that's a slippery slope around hunger,
yeah.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
But let's just say that hunger state brought up a feeling of being deprived of food as a child.
Yeah.
And then you get the inner body sensation of the deprivation. That's because you can't tell, am I hungry or am I remembering? But you're remembering that it's deprivation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that's why I think a lot of diets don't work. People can white knuckle through not eating.
Right. Right.
But it's the feeling of deprivation
right.
or not being in control.
Yeah.
Is the underbelly, but to process that through the sensation, that would be one way.
Yeah.
But not only it's processing the sensation, but then as the sensation has that arc, then the emotional response will come, what it felt like to be deprived, and the messages you got about yourself. So you're still working all three layers. It's what inroad are you going?
So what I'm imagining is I'm trying to put this in a way that the viewers would, who suffer, would be willing to give it a chance.
I wouldn't work with your body unless you're working with a skilled therapist.
Yeah, and so that's kind of the cool thing. What you were talking about is rather than doing the EMDR too soon and the therapist would know when to best do that, it's, once you have those feelings and you come up against something, that there is a gentler way of dealing with them that's not so overwhelming. I remember doing a group experiential process, and when I was doing the thing, I came up and everything inside of me said, nope.
Right.
I am not going any further because I will go insane and die right here in front of everybody. And I was done.
Right, and I would have said to you, drop that into your body and what's the inner body sensation of I'm gonna die? Yeah. Or no, right?
Yeah.
And then we would work with the feeling state of that, the sensation, and let that flush through.
Yeah.
And then the memory might come up.
Kind of like a midwife. It's like an emotional midwife.
Yeah, that would be a good way of thinking about it.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Yeah.
So they don't have to do the journey on their own. It's somebody that would help them and not take them beyond what they could handle.
Exactly. And because the body is a slower level of information processing, most people can handle dealing with the sensation as opposed to the sensation, the emotion, and the thoughts.
Got it.
So let me move on to internal family systems, which is another powerful psychotherapy, and that's a witnessing model. So going back to our native self, right? In IFS, they talk about the self, and the self has these qualities like calm, compassion, love, kindness, and that's inherent in our system. But when trauma happens, or when experiences, not necessarily even traumatic, happen, that part of the self splits off into parts. Mm-hmm. Now, we don't have little children running around in us.
Right. It's not like Sybil. It's just little aspects of ourself.
Aspects of ourselves that get stuck in time and space. Yep. And so
at the age of the traumas that happened, that's how I know it.
Or the ages of which the wounding happened.
Yeah.
Okay, and so the goal is to be able to have that presence with oneself and meet these parts and have a self-to-part relationship.
Yeah.
Right? So like I was saying to you, like, I hate getting my central nervous system activated when I don't know where I'm going, right? Yeah. And before we talked on the phone, I was like, okay, I can do this. I'm working with that part that's like, oh my God, this GPS never works well. Like I have a GPS in my vehicle that doesn't really work well. And I'm like, oh my God, I hope I can get there on time. And meanwhile, I'm going like, you can do it. It's okay. You'll be okay. Right? So that's a self-to-part relationship. And in the IFS model, they're saying that we have these protector parts, and then we have what he calls exiles. So protector parts are either managers, I'm not going to do this, I'm not going to do that, or protectors like, he calls them firefighters. They're the ones that are anxious. That's that, no, I'm not going to do it. And then the exiles are the most wounded part of ourselves. And in the IFS model, we usually have protector parts over the most vulnerable parts of ourselves. So the self has to start having a relationship with all these different parts until we unburden the most wounding, most vulnerable parts of ourselves. So that's the simplest way to explain.
I didn't have that languaging going through my therapy, but I recognized that in my imagination, I had a little girl, young little girl inside of me. And she likes to wear her jammies and watch movies in bed and eat grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, comforting stuff. And then a little older preteen. And then I had a Mac Daddy badass teen, the protector.
That was your protector.
Your languaging, and she sort of watches over the rest of them. And in my heightened panic time of my life, they were really there, and I could tell when they come up, and I thought I was Sybil. I was afraid. I was like, how come sometimes I feel like this rebellious teenager, and how come sometimes I just want to crawl up on, someone's lap and, and just be rocked, just be held, like what's wrong with me? Am I Sybil? And my therapist at the time said, no, those are just parts of you that are the ages where you were wounded.
Exactly.
So, and that helped me. And then I was able to meet the needs of those people within myself. And have loving compassion, not judgment. Because I'd get mad, like, I need to be a grown-up right now, and I'm, whatever. And I would negotiate. Look, I need to do this job right now, and then later on tonight we'll wear the
jammies and have the tomato soup.
But right now I need to do this job. And that over time, they just sort of melded into me over years. And now
they integrate.
They integrate, and I don't feel like, and what made me feel better was when Oprah was interviewing Beyonce, and Beyonce had Sasha Fierce. And Sasha Fierce was a part of her that was able to go in front of large, people and perform. And Oprah recently asked her, so do you still need Sasha? And she said, no, she's a part of me now. So I felt like, I had this thing going with Beyonce, so it couldn't be all that bad.
And so that adult part of you, your self-energy, an IFS model would say that self-energy, you brought that to the child parts. And then the child parts could feel safe and and the needs that were needed at the time got met by the self.
Exactly.
Okay.
And then I was able to see how those needs were being met outside of myself. And the reason why I'm adding more to this is because I've met so many people, and I'm sure you have too, that are angry that they don't have something. They don't have their mom, or they're wounded. And I'm hoping that this part of our conversation is giving them hope that you're not Sybil, that this is normal to have these parts, to have compassion for those parts, that they can be integrated with the right support, and that there can be a shift out of that bitterness, resentment, anger that they might be feeling.
Or stop playing it out in their relationships that they have. If it's a love relationship, if it's a relationship with your children, if it's a relationship with your coworkers.
Quit taking it out on them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So then you learn to work with those parts so that you become more whole.
Yeah.
Okay? And now that goes into Deirdre's work, Safely Embodied, where Deirdre took it one step further, repairing the attachment system.
Okay, tell me more about that.
So when we talked about the attachment, developmental, relational trauma, so we all need a felt sense of belonging. So like I can do 50% of my work in my self-to-part relationship. But until we actually bring that out into relationship, are we ever going to really attach those early woundedness? Because we are wired for connection.
Yeah.
And so we have to have that.
I thought it was just me.
Right? It's not just you, it's all of us. And so we have to have that felt sense of belonging.
Yeah.
We have to be seen and known. Not like ego, seen and known, what we were talking about, but like we have to feel like, you know, like people get us and that we live our life and people see us for the wonderful that we bring to life.
Yeah.
And that needs to be validated, you know, or we don't know. We don't know. We don't have a mirror. We have to have a mirror that says, okay, this is where I'm at. We also have to feel comfort and reassurance, and we can do it as so far ourselves.
Yeah.
But we need it from outside ourselves also. And we need to find relationships that can help us repair that.
Do you think that's where Facebook plays a role, where people are looking to likes, they post something, and when they get feedback on that, they feel validated?
Sure. I know when I post something, I just redid my kitchen and I got like, I don't know, close to 40 people liking it. And it was like, people like my kitchen, right? Yeah. We also have to feel our sense of self-worth and our value. Like that's, because when you grow up in a dysfunctional family or you've been traumatized, either attachment trauma or event trauma, you don't feel your worth or your value. Like that's like, I don't matter. So many people wear that hat, like I don't matter. Mm-hmm. And that's so important to our psychology and who we are and how we move through the world. And then we also have to be able to put our best self forward and to thrive in this world. Mm-hmm. So Deirdre has online courses, so people who don't want to go to a therapist and learn how to be in their bodies and learn about attachment wounding. She has this beautiful online learning community. It's like $35 a month.
I love that.
And she posts things, and the community, which is international, talk about their healing, what they're doing.
I'm going to post her stuff on my social media.
Yeah.
Because she sounds so intriguing.
Oh, I would love for you to meet her. She's just an incredible.
Well, we're going to try to interview her. I'd love that, and I will.
Well, we have to ask her first.
I'm asking you right now, Deirdre. Please, please. And we'll put her website up too. I'll put that on my social media. Would
Great.
Because that is being comfortable in your own skin is just so important.
And learning to have nourishing relationships. Yeah. Right? Because you can do your work. You can reprocess your trauma. You can have a self-to-part relationship. But if you don't know how to be with others,
right,
you know, you're not living life fully.
Right.
So then I want to just talk a little bit about where my work is going
before
we end.
So, so these retreats that you do, I saw that on that you did seasonal, which I love that, because that's, you know, doing it spring, summer, fall, winter. Yeah. That's beautiful. So you've done your spring one. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so these are called my Replenish Day retreats. And so I have been a 15-year martial artist and a Qigong practitioner, a meditator, and a Tai Chi teacher. And so I learned how to, in martial arts, learned how to get my active defenses back. Right, my fight, flight, get them reorganized so that my amygdala now knows how to work in its functional way. And part of my training was really being in nature. Most of my training was being in wilderness trips where you got stripped to everything and had to do these incredible feats. And so nature became a way of nourishing. And that also through my meditation in Qigong and Tai Chi practice, I started to study Taoism and Buddhism. And the Taoists were, you know, Taoists, their fundamental belief is that everything, you know, you align with nature. Nature is the teacher.
So everybody who knows me that's watching right now is groaning right this second, because I start every day with a Facebook Live of the sunrise. I'm all about nature, so I am too. I'm sitting in my skin.
Yeah, and so the stillness, which is the winter one, is really about aligning with the energy of winter, which is where we go into ourselves. And if we can, and if the stillness, like this morning, I don't know when you woke up, but at the
Beautiful.
incredible beauty.
Yeah.
The sun was gleaming and the snow was sparkling, and it
Like
was
diamonds.
like diamonds, and it was so still. And if we can learn to align with that nature, that's part of us. We're not any different from that tree that's like holding all that snow and stillness, right? So stillness becomes a practice. So I talk about the energy of winter, and then I did study some acupressure and some Chinese medicine. And so just only for trauma, I only took the pieces that would work with trauma. I didn't go the whole system because I'm not that interested in the whole system. And so I learned skills and practices that help regulate the body. So for the stillness one, we did a lot of deep meditation. And then the other piece with stillness is that when we go and quiet our system and still our mind, our body, and our spirit, then we open up to joy. Okay? So the second of the replenish is the renewal, and that one's coming up April 28th. And I do this out of my house right now, so I only go up to 7.
Let's go.
Only 7 people, 7 women. I'm only working with women, and it's a very small group. And I cook. I'm a good cook, so everybody loves. So we have lunch and dinner together. And renewal is about the energy of spring, where there's a rebirth, a new beginning. And so we align with that and the organs in the body that represent spring. And I also integrate the psychosynthesis piece, was a psychospiritual model that I worked with in the 90s. And so that's, again, it's very similar to IFS, but instead of the self is part of it, but then we also have a higher consciousness. Jung called it the collective unconscious. We're all connected to this higher energy, and we call that spiritual. So some people call it higher self. And when we can tap into, so the wounded parts also have an opposing opposite of a nourishing polar. And so we find that way to integrate that nourishing piece. So, like, for example, fear, the opposite of fear is bravery or love, right? So it could be either one. Yep. So then rejuvenate, which was a ton of fun this summer, it's all about joy, and it's all about embodying joy in the height of summer. There's an abundance of growth. So that's where we're working with our energy system. We embody all of the joy and the abundance. And then release is in the fall. That's when we sort of, like the leaves are falling from the trees, we're letting go, we're learning to surrender. So the replenish retreats align with nature so that your system goes with nature. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. I love it. Can I sign up now?
Yes.
April 28th, I'll be there.
And then I offer practices. So it can be breathing practices, meditation, qigong practices, or tai chi practices, movement, so that it becomes a self-support system. So I really want people to get to experientially have skills that if they're out of that window, they can go, oh, I can meditate, or I can do a little qigong or tai chi, and I can move my body instead of getting stuck in my thoughts and my feelings.
What I did with my thoughts and feelings is I would go to YouTube and play Soul Train videos, and try to do some of those funky dances.
Yes, because movement is so powerful.
Movement is so powerful, and nature, being in nature. If I could get out of the focus away from my symptoms, away from my what-if thinking, right, away from I am a burden in life, I am socially unacceptable in this world, or whatever crazy thought I was thinking. Instead, if I could watch the eagle fly over the lake, if I could watch the sun, little diamonds dancing on top of the water, right, if I could watch the fish swimming under the water. And
so it makes me think of one other piece that I forgot to say about Deirdre's work. She talks about the nourishing opposite. And I'm more of a Taoist. She studied for many years yoga, and she lived at Kripalu in the 80s. And she talks about and the yogis talk about the nourishing opposite. So you did that very naturally. And when we embody and hold on to the nourishing opposite, again, it's like that Bruce Ecker thing. You can't have your pain and this joy at the same time. And your system is going to go for joy. Right?
Yeah. And it is my joy to be in nature. It is my church. It is just...
I understand.
Yeah, and I love sharing my joy with others. That's why I post every morning. My husband's like, you're over posting. But it's just, I just love sharing that joy and the beauty and the stillness of that. And it is my joy to have made a new friend, and my joy to share your wealth of knowledge with other people. You know, this trauma is everywhere. The Me Too movement with the trauma of the women now coming out, and the shootings, the Parkland shooting, and the people just walking around over medicating with the trauma.
Or our homelessness, our homeless who are, most of them are vets or trauma survivors that the system has failed.
The Bath community is doing a community series of conversations. I'll be speaking on the one March 21st about how can the community of Bath meet the needs of the homeless.
Right, beautiful.
How many open bedrooms do we have in all these different homes?
Right.
What can we do? How can we feed them? How can we get them medical care? And that's it, right? Every town, every neighborhood is a village.
That's right.
And it takes a village. And for the village to take care of itself, we have to take care of ourselves.
Right.
And what beautiful work that you do. I think that we're going to be putting up on this site, and I will put it on my social media as well, how they can find a therapist, how they can reach you, your retreats, wonderful. I know you only pick 7, so act fast.
And I already have people signed up for that one, but at some point I would like to expand it to either a weekend, a 3-day weekend, or find a bigger place where I can have more people.
Okay, so I will find you a bigger place, and we will make it happen.
Yeah.
So Inn by the Sea has said, anyway, and there's a place in Saco also, by the way, great retreat center, but we'll talk about that off camera. So thank you for being here. And those 2 sessions that we've had with Celia has just gone by like that. We could talk for hours. Thank you for your time, and thank you, Blizzard, that we got to do these back to back. And I'm sorry that Bob, you couldn't see him, but I can hear him just saying. Thank you for joining us at Issues That Matter, and this is an issue that matters. So come back and see us next time. Thank you. Bye.